So it's lesson 1 of advanced server-side scripting with Mean. We're just getting things set up. So I'm going to recommend you go into your primary users and then your username directory. And the reason I'm going to suggest we create all our files here is whenever we're going to do a lot of work in this class using the command line or the terminal. That's how we have to launch and configure a lot of things in our Node applications. And the reason I'm going to suggest we do it inside this directory is whenever we open our command prompt or our terminal, this is the default directory that it takes us to. So that way we don't have to change directories every time. So what I have in here and what I would recommend is just create a folder with a simple name. So I have a Node folder here. You might want to create a Node or a COMP2106 folder inside of your main user directory. Again, that's the way it's going to be simple. Every time we open a command prompt, we're going to be right here. So we'll probably create, for the first few weeks, we'll create separate folders and just make a bunch of random files. And then starting at about lesson 3, we'll start building one application that we work on each week. And we'll just keep evolving that same one, but it'll be another week or 2 before we get there. So inside of here for today, I'm just going to make a lesson 1 folder. So I'll make a new folder. I'll just call it W20 lesson 1. I have some folders from last semester. So we'll put some files in here. We won't use these files again. It'll probably be the same next week. I said in lesson 3, we'll actually build an application. We'll work with that same one for a few weeks. So I'm now going to open up my code editor. I'll open up WebStorm, and then I'm going to I'll browse to this new folder I just created. Use WebStorm or Visual Studio Code, whatever you like. So it's going to ask me to open. So I'm going to open up that new lesson 1 folder I just created. So that'll be in my user directory, my username, Node, and then I have this empty W20 lesson 1. If you use a different name or you save your file somewhere else, that's fine. Just suggesting where it's probably going to be the easiest. So I just have an empty directory here. There's nothing in here. So we'll write our very first file. I'm going to make a new JavaScript file. So I'll just right-click my folder. Say new JavaScript file. I'll just call it Hello World. I don't need to give it an extension because I said it's a JavaScript file. WebStorm will automatically give it the .js extension. If you put the extension in, no problem, but not necessary. We're just going to get a blank file. So we'll write the world's simplest file. So this file, we're not even going to use the browser. We're just going to print out a message using the JavaScript console object. Now, it's coloring this yellow. It wants me to put in a semicolon. So if I do, it should go away. If I take it out, it may give me, oh, actually fine. So I'll save this. So now we want to test our page. If you're in WebStorm, the easiest way to do this is I can actually just open my terminal right here. Down at the bottom left, there's a little tab that says terminal. If I open it, it opens a command window right here. Or I could open my operating system command prompt and browse into that directory. So if I want to run my file, I just use the node command because I've installed Node, as I hope everybody has by now from that link I put on Blackboard. So So if we want to run our hello world file, I don't need the extension. I can put it in, but it's not necessary. So it just logs out hello world. Yeah, they're on Blackboard. So you could, if you want, you can use your operating system, terminal or command prompt. So I'll do that as well. Yep. I know, I created it. Just create a new folder. So you can run it from your operating system, terminal, or command prompt. It's one of the useful things about WebStorm is it has the command prompt built in this little terminal window. So if I want, I can do everything within WebStorm. Did anybody get an error saying node is not a recognized command? What does it say? Okay, try this. To make sure node's installed properly, try node space -v. That should show the version of node that's installed. So mine may be a little older. I installed my version back in September, my latest version. You may have a newer version. What version? If you try, check your node version, what version number do you get? 7? 10? Sorry? 9, okay. Are you using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code? Okay, yeah, I would recommend, I've listed on Blackboard, Visual Studio Code is a different application. Okay, so yeah, they'd be better off to use Visual Studio Code, Brad. So notice this is just a plain JavaScript file. There's no real way to run this. It's not a web page because as he mentions in this video, Node is really just low-level communication. It's not by itself, it's not a web server. It's just plain JavaScript. Now, it does have libraries, as we see a little later in the video. It does have some libraries. Here, there is an HTTP library. So we can actually, Node has a built-in server. We just need to link or include the library, and then we can start a server. So we're going to try creating a second page now, which we could actually run a web server and load it in our browser. So I'm going to make a new file here, new JavaScript file. We'll call this one server. We want to use Node to actually build a web page. So the first thing we need to do is include Node's built-in HTTP library. So when we install Node, it ships with a bunch of libraries or modules, and one of them is an HTTP library for running a web server. Okay, so we don't need Apache, we don't need IIS Express like we did with ASP.NET. So here we can use either const or var, doesn't matter really. So then we want to start the web server. All that. So this library, like we saw in the video, it has a create server method. Now the syntax in the video is a bit old. So this is asynchronous, so this create server takes a callback. It takes another function as an input parameter. If we look at the syntax in the video, this is old. This video is before ES6, it's way back in 2013. So the parameter here was an anonymous function. Notice this function has no name. This says function, and the function takes two parameters, the HTTP request and then the HTTP response we want to send back to the browser. So we're going to do this, but we're going to use ES6 syntax. So instead of the word function, we're going to use sorry, may as well get my syntax right. So we have an anonymous function passed as a parameter. So every time we get a request event in, we want to first send back a header with the 200 response. Actually, we'll do this as well. We'll still go into type. We're just going to send plain text response back. 200 is our HTTP code for OK. We'll send back a hello world, and then we'll open the response. So this function happens asynchronously. It doesn't block. So it can handle multiple request events. And every time it'll process this HTTP response. And the first time create server gets called, we need to tell it that we're going to listen. And we specify an HTTP port. I'm going to use port 3000. And there's a reason for this. We could put in the video, I think he used port 8080. We could put any port number we like in here and it will work. The reason I'm going to use 3000 is later on we're going to use Express for handling the web server. Here we're basically creating the web server manually with the HTTP module. In a few weeks, we're going to use Express to do this. And for Express, the default port is 3000. So we may as well get used to running things on port 3000 now. We can change it, but 3000 is fairly standard. And then the last thing we'll do is maybe print a message out to the console, HTTP server running on port 3000. So we'll save this. And now if I run the file, it should start our server and it should start that event loop. Our server is now going to be continually listening for events. And every time a request event comes in, it's going to run this code, print hello world to the browser, and send this response. So this can happen repeatedly. This console log happens outside the event, so this is only going to happen one time. So I want to start this. I can try the command node server. So it prints a message in my console. The HTTP server is running. And now if I load up the browser and go to localhost 3000, it prints our hello world response. Notice if I refresh it, that console log only happens once because the file loads. So our callback is checking continually for events and will happen over and over again. But this is only happening once, basically, when we launch the file. It doesn't get called multiple times because it's outside of our callback. Now, when the server's running, also, our server is locked. So I can't actually type anything in my command prompt. Even if I try, you don't see anything. What happens if we change, let's say we change this here. I'm going to change my message. I'll put in an exclamation mark in my response. I'll hit Control S to save. Now I'm going to go back and refresh. But notice my page hasn't updated. So once we launch the server, if we make changes to it, we're not going to see those changes until I stop the server and restart it. Now, there is a workaround for this because obviously this is really inconvenient as we're developing. Every time we make a change, to have to stop and restart our server is a giant pain. So how do I stop my server? It's locked here. Control C will stop the server. So if I go and refresh now, I should get a server not found. If I've killed my web server, localhost 3000 is offline. So now that I've made this change, I've added some exclamation mark. If I restart it, and by the way, your up and down arrow keys are your friends in your command prompt. If I hit up, it repeats the last command and it kind of cycles through them. So I don't have to retype my last command. I can just hit the up arrow. It'll repeat the last command I ran. So if I run my server again, it restarts on port 3000. And now if I refresh my browser, my exclamation mark is here. So eventually in a couple weeks, for the first week or two when we make changes, we're going to have to stop and restart. Eventually there's a tool we can install that will automatically watch for changes and it just restarts the server whenever a change gets saved. So that'll save us a lot of time. We can just refresh the browser. And this will run much, much faster. If you think about with ASP.NET, how every time we changed and rebuilt, how long it would take to reload the server. That wait time with Node, it goes away. We're just going to hit save, refresh, our app will automatically recompile. It's much, much faster than our .NET compiler, which saves us time in class, which is good. A lot less waiting around time and a lot more productive time. So this code, we've removed the word function here, and instead we've got this lambda expression. So this is functionally equivalent, where we have our callback parameters with our lambda expression. That's functionally equivalent to the syntax he used here. This is older syntax before 2015, before ES6 came along. So in older code samples of Node, we might see this syntax, but in newer ones, we're going to use this syntax instead. We don't need to type out the word function anymore. It's easier to simply type the equal sign and the greater than write the word function over and over again. Anybody have any questions so far about our first couple of files? All right.
Because of the user folder is constantly asking me for permission to create a file.
Okay.
So I had to go in and I basically had to give permission all the time. So I feel like that's a huge security risk. But is there a way to? I'll look it up later. But you know what I'm saying?
You certainly don't have to run it in there. If you're using WebStorm, it's less important because WebStorm will open the terminal wherever you are. But if you're using the Windows command prompt, it's always going to default. Every time you open it, it's going to take you into your user directory. So it's just more convenient. If you're using WebStorm, you can just use this terminal. So if you want to move it somewhere else, feel free. It's less of an issue if you're using the built-in terminal. The path is more of an issue if you're using the operating system command prompt.
How do you create a folder in Visual Studio Code? I start creating a new file, but there's no option saying create new folder.
It may be easier to create the folder in Windows first and then browse to that folder in Visual Studio Code. Response is not defined? Okay. So it probably is a syntax. So this is in round brackets. Do you have the round brackets around that parameter set? And there's no typos? Definitely. Okay, I'll leave it up. I'll come have a look in a minute. Okay, it's 5 to 10, so we're going to take another 10-minute break here. When we come back, and hopefully, Dustin, this will come back to your question earlier, we're going to try his example of reading 2 files. We're going to try it both asynchronously and synchronously. We can see how it happens. So we'll do that when we come back. Fix it? What was the problem? Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop my server because I won't be able to do anything else with this. So I'll just hit Control-C, which will stop my server. And I'll stop my stream, and we'll take a pause here for 10 minutes.